Okay, we're starting the Daf Yomi for Zevachim Kuf Gimel Amud Beis. The Gemara referred to a dispute between Eliezer bar Rabbi Shimon and Rebbe and Rebbe. So the Gemara on the top of Kuf Daud Amud Aleph says, "My Rebbe, my Rebbe was Rabbi Shimon." What is this dispute between Rebbe and Rebbe Eliezer bar Rabbi Shimon? What is this dispute? So hold on one second. Hold on one second. Okay, so Gemara says, what is this dispute between Rebbe Eliezer and Rebbe Eliezer, Rebbe Shimon, and Rebbe? So the Gemara on the top of Kuf Daled Amud Aleph to Tanya, Rebbe Omer, Hadam miratzeh al or b'fnei atzmo. That Rebbe says the blood provides an atonement for the skin on its own. So let's say you have the skin of kochi kochim, you have the hide of kochi kochim that was flayed, it was skinned, and then the sprinkling of the blood will allow it for the Kohanim, even if it will not allow the meat. For example, if the meat became disqualified prior to the sprinkling of the blood will still be okay to approve the skin. The sprinkling of the blood will still be okay to approve the skin. And for sure, if the disqualification in the meat happened after the skinning and after the sprinkling, for sure it will be permitted. So Rebbe says, Adam meratzeh or b'fnei atzmo, ukeshu ma'basar. And also when it's with the meat, meaning to say before it's skinned. No adbo, p'tul, ben kodem zrika, ben la'achar zrika, harehu kayotzibo. So therefore, if there was a disqualification in the meat before the sprinkling or after the sprinkling, then the law of the skin is like the law of the meat, and both of them are going to get burnt. So the one case in which the skin is able to be disqualified is when it's still with the meat, meaning to say before it's skinned. And then there's no distinction between disqualification that happened prior to the sprinkling or to something that happened after the sprinkling. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer or Shimon says, "Ein adam meratzeh or b'fnei atzmo." Rabbi Eliezer or Shimon says the blood does not atone for the skin by itself. Meaning, say if the hide was skinned and then became disqualified, and then the meat became disqualified, even though he went ahead and sprinkled the blood, the skin is not permitted because only a zrika kshera can allow the skin, only if it's a kosher sprinkling. So that's what Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Shimon says. Ukeshu ma'basar, let's say the skin is with the meat. No, but psul kodem zrika harei kayotzbo. If the disqualification happened before the sprinkling, then the meat is going to be, then the skin is like the meat and it's no good. Achar zrika, after the meat, kortza basar, sha'achas. Once the meat was allowed one moment, yavshitenu. If the meat was allowed one moment for the altar, you skin it and it's okay for the Kohen. So we see from here that Rabbi's of the position that the blood will atone for the skin. So Lema, the Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shua Kamifli. Maybe Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi are really arguing about a teaching of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shua, which says Vasita o asecha habasar v'adam. It says in the Brights, it says in the pasuk, you shall make your olah the meat and the flesh. So Rabbi Yeshua Omer. So Rabbi Shua says, "Im ein dam, ein basar, im ein basar, ein dam." He says, if you can't sprinkle the blood, so the sprinkling of the blood is not kosher, then the meat is not permitted for the altar. And also, if you can't bring the meat, let's say it became tamei, then you can't sprinkle the blood. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer Omer, dam afal pi she'ein basar, that you can sprinkle the blood even though the meat will not be allowed, because it says dam zevachecha yishafech. If that's the case, why does the pasuk say you should make your oah the meat and the flesh? Is to tell you madam bizrika, to tell you just like the blood is with sprinkling, af basar bizrika, just like the blood is with sprinkling, also the meat but there needs to be a space between the ramp and the altar. And the Kohen who stands on the edge of the ramp and he throws the meat on the altar and on top of the wood on the altar. So let's say the dispute between Rabbi and Rabbi Eliezer Shimon is the same dispute as the dispute between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer. So the one who says that the blood atones for the hide is Rabbi Eliezer, holds like Rabbi Eliezer, who says that they're sprinkling the blood even after the meat became disqualified. Mandamar lo hortza, and the one who says it doesn't work, he holds like Rabbi Yeshua, who says you don't sprinkle the blood if the meat became disqualified. The Gemara says no. Everybody would agree, according to Rabbi Eliezer, who says that the sprinkling of the blood, even if the meat became disqualified, everybody would agree that the sprinkling would allow, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the sprinkling allows the skin. Ki Rabbi Yeshua. They only are according to Rabbi Yeshua, who says that sprinkling of the blood is not done if the meat became disqualified. Manda Amar, according to Rabbi Shimon, who says Lo Hortza, he holds like Rabbi Yeshua, straight out. Manda Amar Hortza, but according to Rabbi, who says the blood is going to atone for the skin. Armocha Adkan will come Rabbi Yeshua Hasam Ela Babasa. Rabbi Yeshua only says his opinion there by meat. Delay cup say the Kohanim, because there the Kohanim have no loss. And so therefore the Torah says if there's no meat, there's no blood. Avo but by the skin, the cup say the Kohanim, where the Kohanim are going to lose money. Afilo Rabbi Yeshua Moda, that even Rabbi Yeshua would agree that you don't make the Kohanim lose the money. Because this is like a case of b'di'eva where you sprinkle the blood. The Tanan nitma basar or nifsal, that if the meat became tamei or became disqualified, o yatsa chutz l'klayim, Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yizrok, that Rabbi Eliezer says you still sprinkle the blood. Whereas Rabbi Yeshua says, well, Yizrok, but Mod Rabbi Yeshua Shem Zara Korotza. But in that case, Rabbi Yeshua said, and if you sprinkle the b'di'evet, it would work. So to here also in a b'di'evet situation, it would be effective for the skin because otherwise the Kohanim would lose a lot of money. Amar Rabbi Chanina, Skan Kohanim, so Rabbi Chanina, the deputy Kohen, said, in my whole life, I never saw skin that once it was skinned and then they discovered the blemish on the Bechor afterwards, that it was taken out to be burnt. And the Chachamim say we don't accept that's proof. How could Rabbi Chanina say this? What about the bull of Yom Kippur and the bull of the community and the goat of Yom Kippur? That you burn them with their skin. So yeah, that's not what he meant. But mitzvahs on Kamrin, we're not talking about where it's done properly. We're talking about where a carbon was not done properly and you have to burn it. Very kodem hevshet v'kodem zrika. But what about the case where it was before the skin was skinned and before the sprinkling of blood? Then of course you would take it out to be burned. No, the Gemara says chol kamrina. No, we're talking about a case where the skin was flayed and only afterwards was it taken out to be burnt. That's what we're talking about. But what about the case of achar havshet v'kodem zrika or Rabbi Eliezer Shimon? What about the case of after it was skinned and before the sprinkling? According to Rabbi Eliezer Shimon, the Amar Eina Damar Atzel or B'fnei Atzmo, he says that if the blood is by itself, it doesn't atone for the skin. So he says, yeah, because Rabbi Chanina didn't hold like that. Rabbi Chanina, to Rabbi's sphere, he held like Rabbi that it wouldn't work there, that you would be able to sprinkle the blood under those circumstances, and he would get the hide. No, it's even possible to say Rabbi Chanina hold like Rabbi Eliezer Shimon. Moda Rabbi she'ein hefshet kodem zrika. Rabbi will be on the position that you don't. That it just didn't happen. You didn't skin it before the sprinkling of the blood. Gemara says, nimtzes treifa b'mnei me'ayim. What about if they found it to be a treifa? So he says, nimtzes treifa b'mnei me'ayim meratzi. He said, well, under those circumstances, if you found it to be a treifa, blood would still work because it was only recognized after it was already skinned or after it was sprinkled, according to Rabbi Eliezer Shimon. Dekanami, Dekatani, indeed we can infer this because it says, Amar Rabbi Akiva midvarav, from the words of Rabbi Chanina, Hamanu shamav shidas bechor v'nimtza treifa, when it skins the bechor and discovers the treifa, she also called him ba'oro, that they can benefit. Shema know that according to Rabbi Chanina, it does work. Now, my Kamashwan Rabbi Akiva. So what's Rabbi Akiva teaching us? Kamashwan Rabbi Akiva is teaching us a few big wound, even outside the temple, meaning a bechor or that has a blemish that is supposed to be slaughtered outside the temple. And the shchita and its slaughtering allows it to be eaten. And if it died before it was slaughtered and has to be buried with its skin, that's when it's Rabbi Akiva is teaching us that such a bechor, if you discover the blemish only after it was skinned, that you could still benefit from the skin. Rabbi Akiva. That a bechor b'amum, that it was slaughtered and discovered to be treifa, if it was skinned first, the skin goes to the Kohanim. That's only where, before it was slaughtered, an expert allowed the blemish. and then you could slaughter. But if it wasn't allowed by an expert because it was blemished, then Rabbi Kiva would allow it. And the laws like Chacham will argue with Rabbi Kiva and say that before it was skinned, even if you only discovered it afterwards, nevertheless, you burn the skin in the base edition. So now we say the next Mishnah on the bottom of 104a, Parim HaNisrafin. So our Mishnah is talking about the chatos hapanimios, the inner chatos that are burnt outside. These inner chatos that are burnt outside, they're the bull that is burnt and the goat that is burnt. That their blood is applied on the inner altar, and then they are burnt outside. Parman Esrafim, that's the bull of the Kohen Mashiach and the bull of the community, and the bull of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur. Usiir Man Esrafim, the goats that are burnt, i.e., the goats of the idolatry and the goats of the people on Yom Kippur. And all of this flesh is not eaten like the other chatos, but it's burnt. Bisman Shem Nisrafim Kemitzvosam, Nisrafim Beis Hadeshin. If they're burnt properly, i.e., everything goes according to the plan, and they're burnt in what's called the Beis Hadeshin, which was outside of Jerusalem. And the people who dealt with them, their garments become tamei. But if they're not burned properly, let's say there was a disqualification, then nisrafin, then they're going to be burnt. But where are they burnt? The Beis Abira. That's where they burn the disqualified kachim. And they don't make the garments tummy. And the Mishnah says, how would they take them out to be burnt when they're done properly? And what kind of involvement makes the garments tummy? They would carry them on basically poles. The first people went out with it, carrying it. They went outside the walls of the courtyard. But let's say the latter people carrying it did not go out. The first people went out, their garments became tamei. But the latter people did not, until they also went out. They both went out, then their garments all of them become tamei. Those who are getting involved in it, carrying it out, their garments become tamei. Rabbi Shimon says, only become tamei once the flame goes on the majority of the chatas. Dite chabasar, once the meat melts, the one who's involved in the burning does not so the Mishnah says, once the meat is melted, then the one who's burning it, his garments do not become tamei. My bira, what is this bira? That's where they burn the bull and the goat that became disqualified. There's a place on the Temple Mount that was called the bira. The whole temple was called the bira. Shenemar habira asher achinosi, the bira that I prepared. It's not for a specific place, but the intent is for something that was burnt on the Temple Mount. There were three places for burning the sacrifice. There was Beis Hadeshin Agadol Hayabazar. There was the large Beis Hadeshin, the burning place in the courtyard. Some Sarfin Psulei Kochi Kadashim. That's where they burnt the disqualified Kochi Kadashim. The Imuri Kochim Kalam, and the innards of the Kochi Kalam. Then there was the Parman, and also Parman Estrafim, the Sirman Estrafim, Shirbam Psul Kodam Zrika. And also the inner bull and goats that there was disqualification for them. There was a Beis Hadeshin Acharaya Barabayas. There was another Beis Hadeshin in the Temple Mount. Shisham Starfin Param Hanisrafim Usirman Estrafim Shirbam Psul Achar Zrika. That's where they built. That's where they burned the Parman Estrafim and the Sirman Estrafim, where disqualification happened after the sprinkling. And then there was the mitzvahs on chutzot shalosh machalos. Then there was the bull and the goats that were burned properly outside the three camps. So the Gemara says, Tani Levi, Shlosha Beis Hadeshanim. Levi taught there were three Beis Hadeshanim. There was Beis Hadeshin Gadol Hayabazara. There was a large one in the courtyard. Some start from Psulei Kochi Kachim, a Muri Kochi Kalim. There they burnt the disqualified Kochi Kachim and the Murim of the Kochim Kalim. And Uparman Esrafim Usirman Esrafim Shirbam Psul Ben Kolim Zrika Ben Lachas Zrika. Even if it happened after the sprinkling of the blood, they still burnt it there. And then there was the base Adesh and Haya Bahar Bias. There was on the Temple Mount. There they burned Shasam, Surfing Parma, Surfing Sierra, Stum Shirem, Salt, Beatziatzin. That they got a disqualification on their way out from the courtyard after they left the courtyard. So therefore they burned on the Temple Mount. And then there's the Tumitzvah son, that the ones that are done properly, you burn it chutz l'shalosh machanot, outside the 3 camps. So now the Gemara asks the question. By Rabbi Yirmiyah, Lina Ma'ushet Toil, the Parman Asram. So these bulls and these goats that are supposed to be burned outside 3 camps, let's say they remained overnight. Is that considered a disqualification? And therefore they're burnt in the Temple Mount, in the courtyard, or the Temple Mount itself, and not outside the 3 camps or not? Do we say do we say that this disqualification of left overnight, that only matters if it's something that's eaten? But these are not eaten, so therefore it's not a disqualification. Maybe it doesn't matter. This question, Abaye asked me, and I answered him as follows. That Rabbi Shimon and the Chaman had a dispute whether or not an improper thought about pigol disqualifies the inner chatas. That Rabbi Shimon says that it doesn't, but Chaman says it does. That if he slaughtered it with the intent to eat it improperly, that then he's done nothing. So since you don't eat it, so the improper thought doesn't disqualify it. So lina nami lo pasla. So also if it's left overnight, since it's supposed to be burnt, leaving it overnight will not disqualify it. Gemara says, no, maybe they're not the same thing. Gemara says, okay, we're going to try and answer it. Tashma. Paraman estrafim, the Syrian estrafim, molim bahen. There is mi'ua on the bulls and the goats that are supposed to be burnt. Misha huktashu, from the moment they're consecrated. But nishlata, once they're slaughtered, then if a psul yom or mechutzer kippurim or tvul yom mechutzer kippurim touch them, they become disqualified. And also bulina, if they're left overnight. Or is it if the meat is left overnight, it becomes disqualified? No, lina say murim. No, it doesn't talk about the meat because balina say murim. But everybody say if the murim are left over, then it becomes disqualified. But from the fact that it says kulan Moen by a base addition, that there's misappropriation even when they're in the base addition. The safer basar ration non-basar. It's clear talking about meat. Gemara says no, not necessarily. Meat the area safer basar ration more. It's possible the end part is the meat and the first part is the immoran. So the Gemara again tries to answer this question. Tashma the Tani Levi. And if a disqualification happened when they were leaving, are we talking about a case where it's lina, where that after they took them out from the courtyard, it was left overnight, and that was the disqualification? No, well, psul b'tumah. It became tameh or psul yisir, who went beyond the place we're supposed to. The Gemara doesn't answer that question. The Gemara raises another question. By Rabbi Elazar. So the Gemara has a couple more questions, but we're going to just do one more ibai. The Gemara says, "By Rabbi Lezer, Yitzia Ma'ashatol the Parman. Let's say it went out of the courtyard before the blood was sprinkled. Is that going to disqualify it? My kamibali. What's the question? Rabbi Rabba. Aliba demand Amar Adayin lo igiyaz mano. It says, according to Rich Lakish, who says that basar kacham kalam that went out before it was supposed to, is it disqualified? Me amrina nani milu the basar deim teflot says kova. Do we say it's only by meat? Avohani, but the Sofo would say that you have to take them out. Well, therefore it's not disqualified. It wasn't supposed to go out yet, so therefore it's not going. It's going to be disqualified. Tashma the Tani Levi, so then it becomes disqualified. Malav, are we talking about psul yitzia? That if it went out too soon, no psul tuma upsulin. No, it's possible it's tuma. So the Gemara doesn't answer that question either. Okay, so we have. This point, we'll leave these questions unresolved, but Baruch Hashem, we'll go over it on Shabbos, and on Sunday we'll do the daf together, of course. Also, stop here.